Hello, everybody. Welcome to the session Data Spaces for Sustainable Data Economy in Agriculture, multi-stakeholder perspective, which is organized in the context of the BDVA Task Force 7, Subgroup 9 on Agriculture, and is also supported by the Demeter project. Let's have a quick look at how this session was organized. Of course, the overall focus is on data spaces, which can be defined as virtual environments to exchange data, but maybe this is not an exhaustive definition. In fact, it refers to technology, and there is a huge challenge there, of course, but technology is not just the only aspect to take into account. In fact, data spaces are considered at European level as a means to achieve leadership in the data economy. So we are referring to business ecosystems where multiple potential stakeholders interact and have different interests. However, we have also other challenges to face, for example, environmental challenges and climate change, as well as societal challenges, including power, knowledge imbalances, and digital divide. That's why we need a specific focus on agriculture and a multi-stakeholder approach. The aim of this session is also to understand if and what has been also achieved and which are the next steps. So now let's have a look at the agenda. Which starts with my quick introduction. My name is Mario Baril, and I work as a business developer for the Research and Development Department at Engineering Informatica. And I will have the pleasure and honor to introduce Doris Marquardt from the European Commission, DG Agri, who will be setting the scene and provide the governance perspective at the UL level. Then we will focus on the national perspective with Patrick Barrett from the Irish Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. Then we will switch to the technology perspective and we will see how challenges, solutions, and the roadmap for technological development will articulate with Marco Turpainen from 1001 Lakes, with Kevin Dooling from the Walton Institute, and with Stefan Steen from the FKI. Then we will put in the farmer's shoes with Giorgio Canocchi from Coldiretti, and we will close with Daniel Azevedo from Copa Cogeca, who will be providing the policymaking perspective. For the moment, I have the pleasure to introduce Doris Marquardt from the European Commission, who will be setting the scene and provide us with the vision of the European Commission. Doris, please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Yes, perfect. Yes, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for having me. I'm Doris Marquardt from DG Agri and Unit B2, Research Innovation. And I say thanks for providing the opportunity to reflect on the question on data spaces for a sustainable data economy in agriculture. And I would like to present one EU-level perspective, and I think it's not the only one, because, for instance, at the end, we will also hear and listen to an EU-level perspective from the farmer side. So in your community, you know the value of data. It's not necessary to reflect on it in detail, but I would like to highlight the potential of data in agriculture, to briefly reflect what are the important dimensions to be considered in rolling out a sustainable data economy. So it was already said it can contribute to increase farm performance as input for digital technologies and precision farming. At sector level, through data sharing, it can increase also the sector's resilience, for instance, through adaptation to climate change. It's also relevant not only within the sector, but also beyond the supply chain. So you could really imagine on totally other sectors interested in agriculture data. For instance, the tourism industry. How does the landscape look like in certain areas? So it's really about more than the agriculture sector, for which the data is potentially relevant. And from the Commission perspective, yes, we also see clear potential of agriculture data to contribute to policy monitoring and evaluation, not only in the field of agriculture, but also, for instance, in environmental policies, climate policies. So in short, you know it, agriculture data has a value, and this increased with quality and with quantity. And I think as it regards quality, so the technology dimension we come also today later. What is important? Agriculture data has value. It is important that this value is fairly shared. And to really exploiting the value of agriculture data requires joint effort. In the data strategy, the Commission has proposed a called Common European Agriculture Data Space as one space in a set of data spaces. So the main purpose of the data space is a trustworthy sharing and pooling of data to be facilitated. And as outlined on the previous slide, the data space has the potential to provide a basis not only for the sectoral purposes, which is really important, but also for research and innovation, for the development of solutions for the sector, and to create forecasting, monitoring, and policy-relevant data. Important, the design is not predefined. It's to be developed, jointly developed following participatory approach. And here it's not only about the technology, but also about governance and business models and the mechanisms to share the data. Also the role, for instance, of public data and the contribution to common good proposals needs to be defined. And here a joint approach is necessary. It's supported under the Digital Europe program, I will come to that, and it's accompanied by a set of legal acts and capability actions, which I will introduce later today as well. And here you raised in the description of the session the question of the potential for overlaps. I will try to highlight that there is a potential for synergies between the different actions launched at the European Union level. So more concrete, what is set out to the rollout of the Common Agriculture Data Space is the so-called coordination and support action to really allow for a participatory approach to roll out and develop the approach to the data space. So it's supported under the first work program of the Digital Europe program. And what is key for us as a Commission is the involvement of stakeholders and member states in the development of the approach of the data space. So, and important as well is the stock taking of ongoing initiatives. So we don't have to start from the scratch. We can learn from the experiences, and it will also be important to link already existing initiatives and efforts. So moreover, it's foreseen to take stock with the experience with a code of conduct. What are the perspectives of stakeholders on that? Are there changes needed to the regime? Does it work? Can we simply take it over? So their stock taking is essential as well. So it's more than the development of technical solutions. This coordination and support action is expected to be followed by an implementation action under the second work program, then to build up on the results of the coordination and support action, and then to set up, let's say, a data space. And I introduced at the beginning that we have several common European agriculture data spaces in different domains, and those are links, for instance, to common building blocks for the data spaces to potentially achieve the reuse of sectoral data in other domains. I provided examples at the beginning, but also to set out the potential of high-value data sets for the different data spaces. Now coming a little bit closer to the framing condition and enablers. What I'm meaning here. So we have for sure framing conditions like cross-sectoral legislation currently evolving, the development of markets, then for instance sector-specific requirements which may relate, for instance, to reporting mechanisms and so on. Then there are examples of enablers. And with enablers, I mean the capacities to roll out an effective data economy, and in this case, also effective data spaces in agriculture. So to name here, for instance, is research and innovation, to inform the decisions on the common European agriculture data space. To capitalize research and innovation, which opportunities are there to capitalize agriculture data? To develop database solutions for the agriculture sector, and to develop secure data sharing and pooling technologies. There are other types of capacity buildings, for instance, the development of digital skills, advisory service, investment support, which are also essential to roll out an effective data economy. And also cross-sectoral legislation can form enablers. We will come to that. So if we look at the framing legal initiatives, then we have for the data spaces quite relevant the Data Governance Act, for which political agreement has been achieved earlier this week between co-legislators. So here's the overall ambition, like also for the other acts just to be introduced, is the ambition to better use and reuse data to facilitate this, among others, through provisions on data sharing intermediaries, on data altruism, and the better use of sensitive public data, and the creation of a European Digital Innovation Board, which will also be important to, in the context of cross-sectoral mechanisms on data sharing. Then forthcoming, the so-called Data Act, there will be a particular focus on achieving clarity on co-generated data between businesses and also businesses and consumers. And it's also about facilitating of business to government data sharing and business to business data sharing overall. Then briefly to be mentioned already, the Implementing Act on High Value Dataset, where, for instance, for the agriculture domain, geospatial data might be of high interest as an input to the Common European Agriculture Data Space, but also available for all other data spaces there. So that will be data sets which are freely available, ready to go for everyone to download. And the Digital Markets Act will frame also the data markets overall across sectors, with a special focus on regulating gatekeepers on gatekeeping online platforms. So if we now look at the situation and the framing situation for the Common European Agriculture Data Space, we can differentiate between different levels. So we have, for sure, for data sharing and governance structures, a sectoral and data space specific regimes. So at the moment, for instance, in the agriculture sector, there is a code of conduct providing a kind of regime for data sharing in the sector. Then we expect within the, let's say, the coordination and support actions that governance structures will be developed to also frame a regime for the common agriculture data space to be set up. Then there are horizontal actions and rules framing, let's say, the portfolio of common European data spaces. So one example is the Data Support Center, which will link and provide assistance to the rollout of all the data spaces, and the use of common building blocks to, on the medium and long term, facilitate data sharing across the different data spaces. And then, as already introduced, framing conditions concern also the horizontal legislation, applicable not only to the specific announced common data spaces, but also beyond the data spaces. Now let's have a look at the enablers. So one key enabler for a sustainable data economy is research and innovation. And I am today quite selective, only focusing on the pillar 2 of Horizon Europe, and provide some examples relevant for the rollout of data sharing mechanisms in agriculture. So one key initiative developed at European level, and which is expected to go hand in hand with the Common European Agriculture Data Space, is the so-called Horizon Europe Candidate Partnership Agriculture of Data. And the main purpose and objectives foreseen for that partnership is using the possibility offered by data technologies in the field of Earth observation in combination with data technologies to provide support to improve the sustainability performance of the agriculture sector and to improve the capacities for policy monitoring and evaluation. So looking at the timeline, it will be implemented under Horizon Europe Work Programme 23-24, but the preparations and the development for the partnership, the approach towards the partnership are already ongoing. We had webinars earlier this year, and who is interested, there will be another stakeholder webinar on 10th December. So it's also following a co-creation approach with much participation. There is no coordination and support action, but a core group of member states developing the proposal for the partnership under consideration of the stakeholder contributions. So meaning currently 19 countries, not member states in this case, because also associated countries are welcome to join, are developing a partnership proposal. And the core shares are Denmark, Italy, and Spain. And there will be continuous stakeholder involvement to frame the partnership. So, and if I said at the beginning, we are aiming for synergies between the common European data space on agriculture and this partnership, then for instance, this partnership has the potential to highlight how the data in a common European agriculture data space can be capitalized through research and innovation actions with a particular focus on data-based solutions for the agriculture sector. As a rule of thumb, for the supplementarity between the programs Digital Europe program and Horizon Europe, we can say that the focus on Horizon is more on research and innovation and also to some extent capacity building. And for the Digital Europe, it's more about the upscaling of innovation and the deployment and capacity building as we have it for the data space. Other actions relevant under Horizon Europe of direct relevance for the development of the agriculture data space and to allow for informed decision, for instance, on investments in data and digital infrastructure are two topics here in the 221 work program of Cluster 6, focusing on the development on the markets and the use of digital technologies in agriculture, as well as the mechanisms on data economy in the field of agriculture and the effects of data sharing and big data, and to also make it feasible for the end users and the different stakeholders involved in data sharing. Then we have also actions more from the technology point of view under Cluster 4, which are of cross-sector relevance and to further develop technical solutions, for instance, to increase the trustworthy and secure data sharing. I only list some of them. I know that most of you have followed today already a Cluster 4 info session, so I will not repeat that, but only to raise the awareness that also for achieving technology advancements, there are sufficient actions to support the rollout of the data spaces. So we can also differentiate different levels of actions in the field of data and digital infrastructures. And here are some examples. We are acting to some extent at systemic level, for instance, with data spaces and platforms of larger scale. Also with the provision of, let's say, more centralized computing capacities and the provision of data, for instance, the high-value data sets. Then we have a kind of intermediate level, for instance, to the providers of database solutions or smaller, let's say, data platforms and joint efforts. Sometimes such joint efforts of data sharing are within larger platforms and there is a community sharing their data. And what is also important for rolling out a sustainable data economy in agriculture is to consider the role of the end users and also to build capacities there. It already starts with hard and software. So if you would like to have more data in, the sensors are important, for instance, to enable the end user to generate more data and to ideally also share and capitalize it and analyze it through the different means. Another important aspect is training and advice. Also trust us advice in the interpretation of data and the use of data. So if we are now looking on the question how the different instruments at European level and sometimes also programmed at national level may go hand in hand and how synergies can be achieved for exactly achieving a sustainable data economy in agriculture. We can here look at only 3 examples of the programs available. So other for instance, the Recovery and Resilience Facility and the Connecting Europe facility, where we have more, let's say, larger scale investments in, for instance, data and digital infrastructure and cybersecurity actions. Here we have now Horizon Europe, the Digital Europe program, and the Common Agriculture Policy examples. And if we are looking at the second column, there you see already the differences in scope. For Horizon Europe, as already mentioned, we have the scope on research and innovation. Then in Digital Europe, we have innovation and deployment, and to some extent capacity building. At the Common Agriculture Policy, we have the level of application and the more end-user focus. So, and the different actions listed here, you see already how they may go hand in hand. It starts with the setup of data spaces supported under the Digital Europe program, the support to decision-making on how to roll out and set up data spaces through research and innovation action, and how to capitalize and the data potentially also supported through research and innovation action, and then to also enable the end users through actions, for instance, under the Common Agriculture Policy, such as advice, training, and also investment support into digital tools and tools relevant for data collection and analysis. So how do the different initiatives interplay? What are the indicated timelines? So if we now take the Common European Agriculture Data Space as central element, so we will have the call out end of this year. And then you see the development over the years of the coordination and support action to expect it to develop approach towards the Common Agriculture Data Space, where we hope to involve stakeholders, member states, and achieve joint efforts. Then followed in 2024 with an implementation action also supported under the Digital Europe program. So in parallel, we have the information generated through different Horizon 2020 actions. And I'm pleased to see that one project is proactively involved today, but also other projects are doing great efforts to support and inform the sustainable data economy and the aspects important to roll in economy and approaches like data spaces out. Then there will be forthcoming Horizon Europe projects quite important to inform also the development of data spaces seen. And at the end, on the bottom of the slide, you find the different legal initiatives where we expect that they frame the conditions for the rollout of the data spaces. And let me conclude. And I think that well supplements the introduction we had by Mario at the beginning. Cornerstone for a sustainable data economy in agriculture, it's not only about technological innovation and linking the data sets. No, we need more. We also need social innovation, including business models, and we need governance structures jointly developed. So governance structures at sector-specific level and cross-sectoral regimes are both important to achieve a sustainable data economy in agriculture and going beyond agriculture. And for achieving a sustainable data economy involving all actors potentially involved, for instance, leaving no one behind among the farmers, capacity building measures are quite important also to increase the overall effectiveness of the data economy and to fully exploit the potential of agriculture data. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Many thanks, Doris, for this quite comprehensive, multidisciplinary, but also concrete presentation with the opportunities and deadlines to monitor and follow across the different programs. I would have a lot of questions from my side, but I would prefer to leave space for the audience. And we have already 2 questions for you from Emmanuel Mondon. The first one is, most of the high value data sets are coming from space assets. Would you support the idea of creating a data space for data coming from space assets? Can you answer? Sorry, you are muted, Doris.
My apologies. Whether we have a dedicated data space for only space technologies, I don't know whether that is necessary, because many data spaces will be interested in space data. So for instance, looking at agriculture data space data sets, and database solutions generated through space data will be relevant. But similarly, for instance, the Green Deal data space is quite interested in space related data sets, and it will be an essential ingredient as well. So the high value data sets, I think it's good that it is related and linked in the questions, will be available for all data spaces and for all interested end users, independently whether a member of a data space or not. And I think so we have to see space data. What would be nice if we don't only think about the raw data of space data, but of end user friendly space database solutions. And I think here the data spaces can play a key role to exactly provide that to their communities in a tailored way. So for the agriculture, for instance, you need the interpretation of the space data. And that, for instance, is an essential task to be achieved, for instance, in the partnership Agriculture of Data, to highlight database solutions building up on Earth observation data and capitalize Earth observation data through data technologies, providing tailored database solutions for the agriculture sector. And similarly, I expect it to be done for other, let's say, data spaces in other domains. So also mobility might be interested in space data, and not only the Green Deal, but also, for instance, the data space on smart communities, for instance, particularly if it comes to air monitoring there in that case. And so far, I would say space data is quite relevant. It may serve different, let's say, data spaces, and it would be nice if we achieve it, that we have tailored database solution building up on space data.
Thanks again, Doris, for this answer. If you can stay, maybe we can check if we have the time for more questions. Thank you so much for the moment again. So now let's increase the zoom and focus on governance perspective at national level. We have Patrick Barrett from the Irish Department for Agriculture, Food and Marine. Patrick, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mario, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll just go to full screen. So I'm hoping to speak to you from the Irish perspective, just to give some level of detail. So just to maybe start off in this sort of transformation path, a little bit like what Doris was describing. We are trying to take the approach where building up from activities that have been funded through our national competitive research programs, and also the Horizon 2020 opportunities in the previous framework program period, and now reflecting on the drivers that are coming under the CAP strategic plan process around the agricultural knowledge and innovation system and the outlook on agri-digitalization. Us in the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, as the lead on the CAP strategic plan, is trying to work with relevant national activities on national digital and artificial intelligence strategy development, and work through I suppose, prompting and funding and engagement with industry that has been undertaken through our enterprise agency, and working through various representative groups like AgTech Ireland, or various funded clusters on agri-tech and centres of excellence, to increase the level of technical innovation that's taking place, and trying to accelerate the ideas from research through various different types of acceleration hubs. But also, like, quite interestingly in Ireland, is we have quite a lot of US and international based venture capital funds looking using Ireland as a hub, working across Europe, looking at the scaling up of agri-digital and agri-tech in innovation. And as a country, we have invested quite heavily in various research centres, pulling together all the main players in tandem with the agri-food industry, but also with a large range of multinational companies that are based in Ireland, including, for example, Microsoft or Origin Enterprises. And I think this kind of uniquely kind of sets out Ireland as a place where there's quite a lot of investment in agri-food technology, so quite a lot of technological innovation, and one of the few countries worldwide to see kind of a deal rise in terms of investment. So that's kind of the landscape that we're working from. And of course, what we have is we have already a significant number of private companies who are dealing with data and data spaces on an ongoing basis. So, for example, I just picked out a few highlights here. Like there's a company called HerdWatch, working across with over 10,000 different types of farms, different sectoral areas, addressing a lot of matters in relation to compliance, data in terms of inputs, etc. We also have one of the Irish Cattle Breeding Federation. It's the largest beef genomics database in the world. We also, and that's a public-private partnership where industry is sort of operationally supported by the Department of Agriculture and strategically. And so it ties in with a lot of different activities that are supported under common agricultural policy. And then there's companies, of course, doing things like, I suppose, soil testing and geotagging of soil testing. And this is allowing for traceability going from the supermarket to the soil. So very much a kind of engagement between the market, the processors of milk and dairy and beef and data applications. Of course, there are some public related matters which would make high relevance in relation to the carbon footprinting of Irish agriculture. And there's quite a lot of this comes into the social elements. So there's quite a lot of farmers who are parts of these schemes. You can see a beef and lamb assurance scheme with 51,000 members doing 230,000 carbon assessments. And this is schemes that have significant model data flows, as is shown here, and links back to farmer feedback reports, which is outlining the farmer footprint, and alliances between both the Irish Food Board and the Irish Food and Agriculture Development Agencies and their demonstration farm activities. So a lot of link up in the system. But in all of this, we have been following the considerations on governance, data sharing, business models, and the outline on how this might have a socio-economic impact as has been developing through Europe and through the research funding opportunities. And on our own side in Ireland, we have developed a number of projects, particularly on data use, data security, sharing and ownership in the form of the Agri-Discrete project, largely led by the Walton Institute and Teagasc. And the idea here is that we wanted to develop thinking from all the different actors that were involved in the Irish agri-food sector. So, for example, the Agri-Discrete project worked in a multi-actor manner for the creation of good data governance practices. And it held a range of different workshops looking at challenges and barriers, looking at data sharing management and models, looking at, as Doris would have mentioned, not only the technical elements, but also the social elements and capacity building around, the type of training that the end users might need. Now, this is something that's still in development, but the workshops is informing the development of this type of training. And also around communications on data awareness from farmers, because we know from the Irish Farmers Association, who undertook a digital adoption survey with the farming community, that there's quite a significant amount of both opportunities and risks being highlighted, and these need to be clearly understood and then addressed. So what we're hoping to do to really kind of help Ireland work with our European partners on the development of digitalization is to have this roadmap produced from the Agri-Discrete project, which will have worked with stakeholders to have this kind of review, look at protocols for data sharing, the market models, the different types of business case opportunity, and then how potentially the data value chains might be designed around these rules and procedures and to lead to a functioning value chain. And we've also looked at our Renew 2050 project, which is really looking at foresight and scenario planning around agri-digitalization and really framing that in the context of current and emerging policy developments. And we see this as being absolutely critical. We need to frame the development of the technologies and the use of data in terms of the types of transformation, the agri-food systems, and in framing it into the bioeconomy. So this is where this has led to the development of critical strategic developments that will really, I suppose, set the targets and set the frame for where we hope to enhance the use of technology and data within the Irish agri-food system. The first is the Food Vision 2030 document that was a strategy for government that was released in August of this year and sets out Ireland to be a leader in sustainable food systems. But to enable that, it recognises that we need to have an innovative, competitive and resilient agri-food sector driven by technology and talent. And amongst a range of different goals, we particularly want to develop the digital transition in line with the developments of the CAP strategic plan. And this is about developing a coordinated approach. So this is about the systemic approach and bringing all the actors together. And in particular, one of the elements, of course, that the Department of Agriculture can have their handle on is examining the opportunity for the use of public data. So we already have begun our engagement internally within the department to look at all the data that we have and how this can be, first of all, we're surveying to see what we already have. We know about a good deal of this. And we're also looking at how we can work with this information to develop, I suppose, monitoring and evaluation around the Common Agricultural Policy. But on top of that, we want to build on the Agri-Discrete project. We want to build on where work is going in terms of the EU Code of Conduct on agricultural data sharing and build on this and engage in Europe based on the knowledge. And we want to do this in the outlook of not only a sustainable food system, but the embedding of the food system within a circular and regenerative bioeconomy. And this is the type of thinking that we think is quite important. Sorry, I just want to move on to my next slide. And the next thing to say in terms of the strategic outlook for agriculture is to recognize the role agriculture will play within and land use within our climate action plan for 2021. So what we're seeing is quite significant targets to reduce emissions from 23 megatons of CO2 equivalent to 16 to 18 megatons a CO2 equivalent by 2030. And also quite significant outlook on how we're going to use our land in the future, currently in comparison to how it is being used. And really, we already can see then the research community starting to react to this. So one of the things that we think is quite relevant is that we need to have an outlook on data, on the use of satellites in line with how are we going to use renewable energy at the farm level and across landscapes? How are we going to reduce emissions at farm level and across landscapes? How are we going to look at how our soils and land will sequester carbon? How are we going to look at how we build in outlooks on biorefining at farm level and across the landscapes? And how are we going to look at use of data for development of biodiversity and creation of natural capital accounting? And how are we going to quantify on-farm emissions? So how are we going to look at nature-based solutions, data-based solutions, renewable solutions, mitigating and adapting to climate change? And how are we going to have a blueprint to do this at farm level and beyond farm level? And how are we going to have climate traceable products? So this is the type of thinking that we think that the data spaces are going to play a role in. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that was useful in the context of this conversation.
Many thanks, Patrick, for this systemic perspective. Of course, agriculture agriculture is not an isolated domain. It needs to be conceived as a part of the whole food system, including the concepts of value chains towards sustainability and the consumer in the end. Now let's switch to the technological perspective, and we start with the challenges ahead with Marco Turpeinen, CEO of 1001 Lakes. Marco, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mario, well, very nice to be here. First of all, 1001 Lakes is a company from Finland, and we would like to actually make these data spaces happen, enable data ecosystems, build the building blocks, and connect the different actors. So that's my viewpoint, and I will focus on the technical issues, but there will be many links also to other sides where the challenges lie, and it's a combination of technical and other issues often that we actually need to solve. But well, from the previous speaker, so it's easy to follow with this slide. So it seems inevitable that when we want to make these European goals of farm to fork and Green Deal and digital strategy actually happen, so data will play an enormously crucial role. And like we've heard of these new applications and new ways of having very accurate measurement, for example, of carbon footprint, and making that instantly available on consumer handhelds and so forth. So this is all fantastic, but there remains plenty technical challenges on how do we actually do this at a scalable European harmonized level. How does the Irish consumer get exactly the same kind of a service that a Finnish consumer would have with this access to all the way back tracing to the farm? So, and then, you know, if it's important to move the data from farm to fork, it's also important to move the data back from fork to farm. So that's the viewpoint. On the other hand, when we look at the producers or farmers' view on this whole story, so we are facing a very heterogeneous and fragmented technology-wise, but also governance-wise, you know, practice-wise, very fragmented picture. So this is from the Wallonian project Just Connect in Belgium, and just showing the complexity of all of these different needs, different systems, and the farmer actually has to now operate typically on a one-on-one basis. And this is the problem that the data spaces wants to solve. But again, the technical issues behind are solvable, but they are also hard. So we are facing big hurdles to actually make everything interconnected and interoperable. But the gains, if we can do that, can be really high. So I'm coming to this session also very much from the background of a CSA project called Open DEI, Open Digitizing European Industry, where we actually wrote a white paper on design principles for data spaces, and I'm very quickly just going through the 4 principles that we came up with, and some of these will be something that the forum participants will definitely already recognize, but I think it sort of captures quite well what Europe is trying to get going. So the principle of data sovereignty. So the organizations or individuals should have control when they are the data source, they are the data provider, to actually control what's happening with the data. So kind of capability to be self-sovereign on the data. Then the next principle, data level playing field. So instead of going for structures that actually incentivize and build monopolistic or concentrated structures, and where competition is on the amount of data that any given entity has. So now let's move more into a world where the quality of data and the capability of interconnecting data is the decisive factor. Then the third principle is decentralized soft infrastructure. So when we define these technical building blocks, also governance building blocks, so let's think of ways in which the underlying mechanisms are not centralized. They can be, really reducing the amount of platform-like control points and having more decentralized basis for our technical infrastructure. So that's the third design principle. And the fourth is on the governance side. So we should have collaboration between the public and private actors. So then another outcome of this paper was this three-level stack, and so at the lower level, so we have the soft infrastructure building blocks, which are then categorized in this paper into four categories. So we have building blocks for interoperability, building blocks for trust, building blocks for value exchange, value capture. We have building blocks for governance. And again, I'm not going into details on any of those, but for example, under trust, there is identities and identity management, and how different technology solutions should actually converge in our future into something which would be harmonized and usable across all of these different data spaces. So the bottom layer is usable for all. Then the middle layer, which I've called here data spaces as commons, and when we talk about common European agricultural data space, so this is the idea that for the domain, so we have the domain specific principles, we have the domain knowledge inbuilt in something that we can call common agricultural data space. It can also include open resources like open data, but the idea is that this is sort of the agreed common basis for this particular domain. And then we have the ecosystems where you have sort of instances of different actors actually building their activities and data sharing on top of the common data spaces that we are enabling. And those ecosystems then can and should also be able to go across different sectors. So if I want to combine my agricultural data with banking and finance or health or mobility, so I should be able to do that if it makes sense for our ecosystems use cases. So that's the idea, and there we need these intermediate structures also on how do we agree on mechanisms, how these different sectors can cooperate and exchange data fluently. And again, technical challenges, many there that need to be resolved. Code of conduct has been mentioned many times. So this is clearly, excellent basis on the agricultural side to start building those, what are the principles also. But it doesn't really say technically much. I mean, this document is at the very high level principle. Now we need to go much deeper into, well, how do we actually implement this? What are the technical mechanisms to implement this fair sharing of data in this domain? One approach that could be helpful there is something that we have worked on in Finland funded by the Finnish Innovation Fund, Sitra, which is called Fair Data Economy Rulebook. And here the idea is that, okay, so let's go deeper then in any data sharing network, any instance of these data ecosystems to define, well, we use these technologies, we use these business models, we use these, more detailed legal agreements for our data sharing. And we consider these ethical issues, we consider these security issues. So it's a template that can help in defining those shared rules, and also the technical basis on which the activities will follow. But then you need to turn these into actual systems. And there, the trick is, well, how do we define from these good principles and agreements and on how we share data, actual policies and the actual implementations at the technical level? And here is one approach to that you need to have these usage control rules and how very in a detailed manner you can actually specify what this data can be used for, which purposes, for how long, what needs to be done before and after you have the data. So there is a lot to do on the technical side then to enable this fine-grained usage control of data that's needed in the data spaces to make this happen. On the other hand, and this is a sample of much larger set of initiatives in Europe. So there are existing programs, existing projects that are already far in thinking of these issues of data sharing, but typically they are local or they are regional. They may be for a country like Agri-Food Data Space Finland, but so Digitalization Connect was mostly in Belgium, AgData Hub is in France, AgriRouter mostly again in Germany. So now the question is, from these different different initiatives, which also have a very different technical basis at this moment, how do we converge into something which is the common European data space? And that's the road that we have ahead of us and the challenge that we are facing. But to conclude, so we need this fair data economy thinking, and it is needed in the agri-food chain. We can use these design principles to define the basic building blocks and the ways how the agri-food sector can benefit from these more generic approaches around data spaces. There is the sustainability angle that we've heard already earlier, but then we need to think of the existing systems and how those can be used as seeds for the European-wide common European data space. So thank you, and happy to answer questions if you have any.
Many thanks, Marco. I think it was really relevant to introduce the technological part with a reference to the work of the paper Common Design Principle for Data Spaces from the OpenDI project. I think that the principle really set the context. Now we move to possible solutions with Kevin Dooling from the Walton Institute, who will provide a presentation of the Demeter project. Kevin, please, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. So hi, everyone. Excuse me, my name is Kevin Doolan. I'm the Executive Director of the Walton Institute, based in Ireland. And I'm also the coordinator of the Demeter project. Today, I'm going to talk about just a little bit about the need for digitalization, and of course, interoperability is a critical component on that. And then based on all of that, data spaces obviously play a very key role. If we look just briefly at the challenges, and a lot of you will know this, but a lot of the challenges in the ag tech sector, we have to look around some of the sectoral and policy requirements that actually exist today. Modernization of the common agricultural policy is a very critical element. So it has a focus on rebalancing power, as we've already heard, in the food chain, supporting generation and renewal, ensuring fair income and the protection of food and health quality. And a lot of these things can be addressed through digitalization, but there are a number of bottlenecks that have to be overcome in order to do that, such as things like the lack of infrastructure, connectivity, broadband, and so on, to be able to bring cutting-edge technologies much closer to the field. Limited awareness on behalf of the farmers about the benefits that technology can actually bring. You know, it's not just enough to assume that if we build it, they will come, so to speak. Farmer skills, and this was mentioned in one of the previous speakers, farmer skills also need to be updated so they can engage in a more meaningful way and productive way with technology. On the technical side, I suppose interoperability between systems is still relatively limited, although, you know, often through a lack of defined standards or indeed kind of walled garden business models. And additionally, ownership of data is very, very critical. So thinking about the future common agricultural policy, we're trying to rebalance power there, but how can we do it if farmers can't retain their data ownership? So beyond these limiting factors, there's a number of risks, I suppose, that we need to take care of. Like, for example, the digital divide, particularly between, let's say, small farmers and larger multi-farm players. This can really increase if equal access to technology and training isn't provided. And the impact on jobs, of course, as well must be considered, because the more we automate in the ag tech sector, potentially the less we need humans working in this field. To add to the mix, we also obviously have the European Green Deal, and this applies a certain amount of pressures on us. But this can also be seen as an opportunity, because increased technology deployment and increased support of intelligence to go with it can make great inroads towards sustainability, but not without considering some of the challenges I just mentioned. So within Europe, what are we doing about this? Well, obviously the creating these data spaces is one initiative to address this. And broadly speaking, and apologies if I'm repeating a little bit what people have said, but these data spaces in Europe are going to have the features of being rich data pools with varying accessibility rules, enabling free flow of data across different jurisdictions and sectors, being fully compliant with GDPR, providing horizontal frameworks for data governance and data access. And of course, interoperability is a critical core element of these initiatives. And then obviously, if we focus down a little bit more, we're looking at the common European agricultural data spaces, as the previous speakers have spoken about. This brings me then to the current group of running projects that are addressing these challenges in varying degrees, as you can see on this slide here from the Commission. As you can see, Demeter is focused within the technology development group of projects with NIDA and Atlas. Atlas is the sister project to Demeter. Although I would argue that Demeter should also overlap somewhat into the uptake column, considering we've launched an open call for new participants, and we're also studying adoption models in the farming sector. So this obviously brings me on to Demeter itself. So just very briefly, sorry. What is Demeter? Well, we're a large-scale project of 60 partners based across 18 different countries. The core goal of the project is to implement interoperability across the agri supply chain from farm to fork, but particularly at a data level. Whereas, just by the way, Atlas project is taking a similar approach, but looking more on the hardware interoperability level as well. To verify the results in the project, we've planned 20 different pilots across 5 major sectors, and these are obviously already underway. And you can get details of those pilots on our Demeter website. But I'll talk a little bit about them later on. And we also have a very significant dissemination of results, particularly through the involvement of the World Farmers Organization. And the map here just shows the spread of our pilots across Europe. So as you can see on this, something similar from another speaker, that the agri-tech landscape is obviously very, very crowded at the moment. And as a result, achieving real interoperability is very difficult. Some of the key challenges related to that are related to the availability of data, multiple different formats that data is provided in, the heterogeneity of data models and semantics used to represent data, and the lack of related standards that dominate this space. So within Demeter, we've tried to address this somewhat by producing what we call the Agricultural Information Model, or AIM. This agricultural information model has 5 main parts to it. There's our core meta model, there's a cross-domain ontology, there's domain-specific ontologies. We also have some pilot-specific ontologies that will facilitate the 20 pilot trials that we're running within Demeter. And we have a metadata schema. And we can actually, if anyone's interested, separately, we can provide working demonstrations of AIM in action. Just to go into a little bit more detail on it, excuse me. So this diagram shows some of the layers of the Demeter agricultural information model. The layered approach that we've taken within Demeter facilitates a number of things like interoperability with existing models, alignment with other models on a module basis rather than across an entire model basis. Extension of domains and areas covered in AIM with additional modules is quite easy to do. And maintenance and updating of domain models. Again, we can just modify only specific modules within AIM to facilitate that. And we're mapping to top-level cross-domain ontologies as well, as you can see. Excuse me, on the slide, like OGC, W3C, SOSA, and so on. Within AIM itself, we're representing multiple different data types, as we show here on the slide. So for example, farm data, so looking at field data, field status, soil data, crop treatment, fertilization data, farm input data, energy consumption data. We also bring in Earth observation data like satellite, remote sensing imagery, soil maps, vegetation indices, and so on. And also meteorological data like temperature, humidity, wind speed, direction, and solar radiation and pressure, and so on. Also agricultural machinery data, like engine data, fuel consumption. So for example, within Demeter, we have a number of partners looking at precision agriculture and in-service machine monitoring and things like that as one of our pilots. We also can represent data quality metrics. We're looking at field operation data, livestock data, traceability data, particularly around transport, financial farm data and benchmarking and KPIs, and farmer information. So it's very, very broad in terms of the data sets applicable to agriculture that we build into AIM. And as we see it, then AIM forms a very core part of common agricultural data spaces. We've actually joined forces with a number of other projects and initiatives like Atlas, Smart Agri Hubs, Gaia X, and a few others. We're in the process of preparing a white paper that shows the different architectural approaches we're taking to addressing common agricultural data spaces, and we hope to get that published in the next month or so. It's still a work in progress. Just coming back a little bit on semantic interoperability as well within AIM. So we provide the basis here to enable semantic interoperability within a data space. We can define data elements like concepts, properties, and relations that are relevant to agricultural applications. And this includes the semantics associated with the information to be exchanged. And then within AIM, we establish semantic mappings to various other standards and ontologies. And a lot of these you'll probably recognize as having come from previous and current EU projects like FIWARE, the NGS-ILD, ETSI, Safe for Agri, EU initiatives like Inspire and Foodie, and others like OGC's EO standards, ISO standards, KUDT, and other dominant solutions like ADAPT. So we're trying to bring this all together within a common agricultural information model, as we call it AIM. So the next steps for the AIM itself, basically we want to be able to extend it with more traceability aspects and concepts. We want to integrate more with Isobus, further interaction with Gaia X, which, well, you're going to hear a talk about Gaia X soon, as far as I remember, about a European project that aims to create decentralized data ecosystems for Europe, which can be applied into multiple verticals such as agriculture. We also want to carry on extending AIM with more technology specific to the actual pilots that we're running within Demeter. And by the way, the output of all of this work will be provided in one of our upcoming deliverables in October 2022. And obviously all deliverables will be made available on the Demeter website. Just to conclude, To verify AIM and the other interoperability aspects we're building within Demeter, just to very briefly mention some of the pilots that we're running. So as I said, we've got 20 pilots, and they're organized into 5 broad categories. And each of these has a slightly different focus. So for example, we've got in the arable crop sector, we're looking at water and energy management. For example, smart energy management in irrigated crops or optimal rice irrigation. Also under arable crops, we're looking at some precision farming related work, as I mentioned already, the in-service agricultural machinery condition monitoring, or data brokerage systems and decision support systems. In the fruit and vegetable sector, we're looking at issues around crop health and quality. So for example, we have a pilot on decision support systems for olive growers. We've also got a set of pilots around animal health. So we've got dashboards for the milk and the meat production chains, for example. And then finally, we have a number of cross-sectoral pilots where we're looking, for example, at pollination optimization in apiculture or enabling transparency in the poultry industry supply chain. Yeah, you might wonder why we're doing such a broad range of pilots within the project. Well, that the solutions that we're building within Demeter are relevant in multiple agricultural sectors and can be deployed in as diverse settings as we can find. So that's my brief talk. I hope I kept to the 10 minutes. Thanks for your time, and my contact details are there if anybody wants to follow up.
Many thanks, Kevin, for your presentation and bringing the experience and solutions from the Demeter project. Now let's see how all of this can be integrated at the European level. I leave the floor to Stefan Steen from DFKI, who will provide a flavor of what could be sustainable development from a technological perspective, thanks to GaiaX. Stefan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Mario, and thanks for the invitation. Yeah, the next few minutes are about GaiaX and an agriculture data space in Europe. And I'm professor at the University of Applied Science in Osnabrück for intelligent agriculture systems. And I'm working for the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence. And regarding GaiaX, I'm ambassador of the Agri domain in the German GaiaX Hub and working in the European group. But more on this later. So why do I invest time in GaiaX, and why do I think that GaiaX is an option for a European agriculture data space? Because GaiaX is from the beginning a domain spanning initiative. Already the other speakers mentioned this point, how important it is that we do not set up an isolated agriculture data space. Because as agriculture itself, the data space should have connections and interoperability with the other domains. So if you think about the documentation needs of a farmer, the data space should have a connection to the public sector, for example, but also a finance data space or retail and food data space. They are all interconnected. And this is the base idea also of GaiaX, that we do not have isolated domains, but that we have domains for each of these, or that we have working groups for each of these domains dealing with how to set up data spaces in these domains using the core technologies provided by GaiaX. And what are these core technologies? GaiaX has set up in the last 2 years a so-called meta standard for data spaces. We talked a lot in the different domains, which of course is very ambitious to not only set up an agriculture data space, but also set up a public sector and mobility data space and all together and take all the different boundary conditions of all these domains. But they managed to come up with an architecture proposal. And currently we are in the process of implementing a reference infrastructure or a reference model providing so-called federation services. And these federation services set up the base technology for data spaces in each of these domains. And as Marco already said, one of the important services here are identity and trust. So identity management is needed in each data space, independent of its agriculture or mobility or finance or whatever. And so these are the core components. And yeah, we have one project going on in the German GaiaX Hub dealing with setting up the base or the reference implementation, and there will be a joint sister project in France that work together with this project, and we will have a first open source implementation of these federation services in the next year. And yeah, why this is important to have these services that are based for a data space, because there as also the other said, there will not be this one big agriculture data space, and this is also an idea that is based in the core of GaiaX, that we will have multiple hundreds of data spaces. And these data spaces will be set up by a federator that provides these federation services to the participants of this data space that the federator is spinning up. But due to the fact that they all use the common base technology, these federations are in general interoperable. And this is the core of all of these, so that we if we come back to agriculture, we will not have one big data broker in agriculture. We will have a network of federations. We will have a network of data spaces that are interoperable. And of course, ontology, data vocabulary, and all these things that were mentioned are really important. And there has to be an ongoing discussion which federator speaks which ontology, how can we merge different federators so that they are interoperable. But I think what makes GaiaX really suited for this is that we have a base technology that brings these federator in a common frame, so that they are able to talk about ontologies, vocabulary, and if they join or not. So I'm also of the opinion we have regional specialties in agriculture. So not of these federators has to speak exactly the same ontology and data vocabulary, but the standardization in the future can be that these federators interact with each other and talk about what is a common standard and what can we put in the standard that all these federators have in common and speak. But of course, as Marco already mentioned, there are core questions that we have to solve to achieve this, because we do not start from scratch. So also the others mentioned this. There are already data brokers out there on the market that deal with a data exchange in a certain environment that brings together different partners in the agri-food landscapes. And these data brokers and so also federators worked for years to set up trust, to set up a sustainable business model, to set up the technology. And we will not be successful if we say, here, this is the GaiaX data broker, and from now on, please use this data broker. So it's also, if we talk about what is the right technology to set up an European agriculture data space, we have to think about what is the right technology to serve as glue between already existing solutions out there. And yeah, and the other core question is within GaiaX, we have also different technologies that are discussed there. So GaiaX more or less defines a meta standard. A meta standard that has to be solved to set up to set up a data space, and we provides a reference implementation of this data space. So the Gaia-X Federation services are these reference implementations, but there are also other implementations like an Ocean Protocol-based one, or the Eclipse Data Space Connector together with the International Data Space that provide or fulfills this meta standard. And we have to talk about this in the agriculture domain in Gaia-X. Which of these technologies is best suited to the needs of the agriculture domain? And this is also something where I think Gaia-X is suited for the process of setting up an agriculture data space, because we invest a lot of time in the last months and year to set up these groups that are suited for exactly this discussion. So Gaia-X is organized in hubs. So in the different countries in Europe, there are Gaia-X hubs for these countries. And in each of these hubs, there are the different domains where Gaia-X should provide data spaces. And then we have, for example, an agriculture domain in the German hub, in the Belgium hub, in the Finnish hub, Italy hub. And then we have a European working group that brings together these different agriculture domains from the different hubs, so that we have an interconnection of the different needs of the different countries in Europe, and have the place where we can talk about exactly these interoperability topics and which technology to go for. And it's not only adapting Gaia-X, but it's also providing boundary conditions for Gaia-X. So telling Gaia-X what is the need of the agriculture domain, what should Gaia-X provide to be adaptable in the agriculture domain. And I think this was it from my side. I want to conclude with an invitation. So it's we're working together there on Gaia-X in agriculture. And if you're interested, please go and contact your national hub, or contact me, and then let's talk together about setting up data spaces with Gaia-X in agriculture. Thanks.
Many thanks, Stefan, for your presentation and bringing the vision of Gaia-X across agriculture and several other domains. Now let's quickly take the shoes of farmers and leave the floor to Giorgio Canocchi from Coldiretti. Giorgio, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mario. I think we are a little bit of schedule, so I'll try to save a few minutes, but provide the message. So yes, I'm Giorgio Canocchi. I'm the Chief Technology Officer in Coldiretti Blue Rancho. Coldiretti is a confederation of farmers, one of the biggest, probably the bigger in Italy, with several hundred of thousands of farmers as a member. And in such a context, I follow several things, starting from the precision farming stuff. And somehow I have this kind of privileged point of view, because I interact daily with farmers, trying to put the connection between services, technology-based services, and what the real needs are from farmers. So I've been asked to provide the farmer perspective. Let me try to give a very pragmatic concept today, because it is what we need, I believe. The context has been already somehow presented several times with my colleagues in the previous presentations. The innovation in agriculture is moving fast. Technology solutions are there, almost there. Although from a farmer's point of view, sometimes they may appear too complex. And new players in this space are showing up every day, every single day. If on the right side of this slide, there is the Demeter platform that we leverage at Coldiretti for our farmers. Nice, the similarity with the Demeter project. And I meet every single day a new player to interact with. And the same for the farmers. At their premises, they receive every single day new proposal and stuff like that. Data is the king in this game. Many of you mentioned already, although the kingdom is still quite difficult to manage or unclear how to manage. So at the end of the story, the context challenge is quite clear. There is a lot of movement, a lot of positive progress in the context. The big risk, especially for the final user, let me call it in this way, may be confusing. And in fact, what about farmers? Farmers are, well, I have a 30 years experience as a consultant. Probably I would define them the most difficult clients I ever seen. But apart the joke, actually they are not data scientists. The new generation are more and more prepared, etc. But I mean, it's not their role. They are not the technology guru. They are entrepreneurs. And so as such, they have to manage daily, every single day, the issues related to plant diseases, weather forecast, irrigation needs, is the olive whitefly, I don't know if the translation is correct, coming, and so I need to provide a treatment. I mean, very tangible, pragmatic, day-by-day issue management for their company. It's sure that they are a little bit skeptical. They are resistant. Sharing data is something that still they don't understand very well. But at the same time, and again, I experience this continuously, their ears are burning because they know that there are opportunities from technologies to improve. That there is something that they can adopt to be more effective, more cost effective, get more revenue, be more profitable, at the same time contributed to the sustainability, to the traceability. So to all the stuff that is going to be to create a better ecosystem. The only issue is that they need to get clear messages. To give you an example of the gap, the communication gap, it's in Italy, but I'm quite sure it's a common phenomenon in Europe. We recently did in Coldiretti a quite extensive survey, many questions, but I put here just a couple about precision farming. Look on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side. Have you ever heard the precision farming term? If you analyze a little bit the results, the vast majority didn't hear it at all, don't know what it is, or yes, maybe stuff like that. So imagine speaking to them about NDVI index on vegetation stuff or other parameter, etc. Something that is important, but we need to communicate it, to educate. Probably Coldiretti as a confederation is not probably, is doing that every single day as part of the service, but it's something that we all have to do that. The same on the right-hand side. No? Farmers think that precision farming is for big companies only, and this is not true because in between there are many differences that we can leverage, and for everyone, it's something that is going to be beneficial not only for giants, but for everyone in the space. And there are several other challenges that create a confusion or in any way some uncertainty on data space and on technology from the farmer's point of view. So understand really the benefit. We go often speaking to farmers discussing about satellite observation, Earth observation, sensor data collection. Nice, good. So what do we do with that? This is a very pragmatic question. It is going to cost me something, but I will get a better production and improvement. I will save money, I will get more revenue, I will contribute to the sustainability. All basic questions that often the players, and I mean all of us, often do not answer in a proper way, because we tend to use the language that is part of our skills and not part of their skills. and so on. Sometimes all this stuff has been mentioned many times. The importance of having a smart integration of the food supply chain, or how to drive correctly the investment. Something has been mentioned also, is not in this list, about legislation on the first intervention from the European Commission colleague. So several changes that are all up to us in order to improve the farmer perspective. So in few words, guys, I believe that the concept for farmer perspective is complex and simple at the same time. I mean, they are willing to leverage data spaces and to leverage new technologies, but they need to be convinced and understand what they're going to do, because otherwise we will go nowhere. We can do the best system in the world, we can create the best integration and data interoperability in the world, but fail in the adoption. No? So focus on simple, cost-effective, sustainable data space and technology solution means that once we think tanks, we believe we create something, we are also able to provide it in terms of communication explanation to the farmers, and so on and so on. Focus on education, something that at Coldiretti we do daily. And last but not least, as I mentioned, it is important to drive investment and clarify how there is the return of investment on data spaces integration and precision farming integration. It's all up to us. That's for sure. And I wanted to conclude mixing a couple of concepts coming from Edward Deming, that is a famous manager from the US, no? That without data, you are just another person with an opinion. And the concept coming from the big physicist, Richard Feynman. Yes, with data, you have an opinion that is relevant, but is relevant based on your capacity to convey it to another. So let's start identifying solutions, making good stuff, but also being able and making an effort to communicate it to the final users, in this case, are the farmers. Thanks, and Mario, up to you.
Many thanks, Giorgio. The presentation was very suggestive and inspirational. Unfortunately, we do not have time for more specific questions. We are already late. So let's move to a key pillar for many things that have been said today. I leave the floor to Daniel Acevedo, who will bring the perspective of Copa-Cogeca and provide a focus on the code of conduct of agricultural data sharing by contractual agreement. Daniel, the floor is yours. Thank you.
So I think you can see it. And okay, so first of all, I would like to, coming from a family background in Portugal, North Portugal, is for me a privilege to be here and to be the voice of 22 million farmers and 22,000 cooperatives across Europe. I think I would like to salute also most of the speakers, because they made my life easier. Most of the key points have been mentioned, so I would say that my presentation will be kind of a wrap-up of the conclusions. In Copa-Cogeca, we have set up a task force on agriculture technology. This task force was very important in the development of our positioning in terms of the digital technologies, but in particular on the code of conduct. So in order to save time, I will share the slides later. You can know a little bit more about Copa-Cogeca. But the one important aspect that you must know is that we are committed to the EU common policies. And at this stage, there are a few policies very important for us. So in this conversation, this digital single market and also research and innovation policies are quite important. We hope they will deliver in practical terms for European farmers and cooperatives. Also, the common agricultural policy that has delivered the most integrated single market and provided affordable, safe, and nutritious food to almost 500 million EU citizens and beyond. But also there are a couple of things that are very important, climate change, where we're committed to Paris Agreement, but also the Green Deal. And here it's the main question that we all agree with the principles. The main question is how we are going to implement the Green Deal. And one important aspect is the access to technologies and why digital is so important for us. I think this summarizes a little bit what all the previous speakers have mentioned. It is important to farm, optimize our use of resources to be more efficient. It's better for the environment, to improve the function of the food chain, to allow us to create more value by, for example, providing information to the consumer, and also to improve the life conditions of farmers, to simplify, modernize controls and the CAP. But the most important is actually to provide information to farmers so that they can take better decisions. So, but why is this important to us? Because increasing sharing of data is happening. Farmers have more and more data. They are sharing the data. And for example, when the previous speaker from Coldiretti was mentioning, yes, it's true. Farmers, not all of them have heard about precision farming. But if you ask them, do you use a small robot? Do you use a feed robot? Do you use a thing? They do use already these technologies. They use their mobile, etc. They are creating data, and it is important that we enable them to create a value. But we also see that there is a big difference between the players, and it is very difficult for the storage in the farm to store massive amounts of data in the farm. And there's data for the same farmer now spread over different service providers or different devices, different parts of the chain. So there are a lot of questions in terms of interoperability and in particular lack of infrastructure. I think a very important point that we do share the opinion that we need to share more data. We need to make it easier for the farmer to share data. But we also need to realize that not all the data can be shared widely to everyone across the chain. That does not necessarily mean that you will create value, because there are some data that are sensitive. There is data that should be in the hands of the people that know how to work with it and create value, and not on the hands of everybody. So it is important that the data is also protected, because otherwise we'll undermine the investment that the farmer has done in a collection of data, but also the trust in the system. And I just want to give an example, because a few years ago, the data referring to a GM crop of a Portuguese farmer was made public, and all his investment was destroyed in less than 5 minutes because some people don't agree with that and they just destroy it. So it is important that we make sure that the data is in the right hand to create value. That's how we are going to create the value. Now, as many of you have underlined it, there are some questions that we need to answer, and we need to make sure that EU policies will support the creation of value. And for that, we need also the technical systems, as was mentioned several times, both by Marco and by Kevin. We need to have the proper infrastructure, access to broadband, fixed interoperability, but we also need to have the skills for the farmers and the people that work on the farms, the staff, and in the rural areas, to make sure that not only we have the skills for our farms, but that we also have the ecosystem around that works. Access to investment and then access to innovation research. It is important that this starts in the farm, that this is there to solve the problems of the farm, starting to create value, and then it will spread. And also, we cannot do this if we don't have an innovative, friendly regulatory framework. This is important for access to technologies, and in this particular, there are some trials for drones, for example, but they cannot. But we also have a regulation that does not enable the full spraying of fields from aerial capability. So we need to work on this. And also, for example, we can't, for the moment, we don't have access to the new genomic techniques, which will be important. The Commission works on this on the way forward. And at the same time, we are working on the Data Governance and Data Act that will enable all this digital revolution. And this is important, this work that is extremely important. And talking about this, that's why we together with other European organizations, we started working on some principles to share this data. So this was a political document where, together with our members and our task force, we came to realize that it will be important first to have a proper conversation about what does it mean data sharing. That second, what will be the principles that will be important for the European farmers and their cooperatives to respect in order to share the data and to create a trust, to create transparency, to define the different responsibilities of each partner. And now we knocked the door of 10 other European organizations. They have joined us on this endeavor. And this was the beginning of the discussion on data. And this was very important because all were in agreement on a few certain principles. One of them is that the right on data produced on the farm or during the farm operation should be attributed to the farmer and may be used extensively by him or her. And so that the farmer has this leading role to control and access the data that is generated. That's why it is important to provide him the necessary tools that he can actually take advantage of the data that he is investing on. And also it is important to keep the right data in the right hands and to protect the sensitive data, because there is some data that is important, for example, for the functioning of the machines. You do not need that data to be widely spread. These should be just the hands of the people that need to fix the machinery, for example. And this was very important because these principles that are online, and you can check it on our website if you want to know more. These principles were perhaps the basis for the work of the European Commission that is coming into, that is now on there. And as it was mentioned by Doris, we hope that all this work from the Commission will work on the basis of this code of conduct. But of course, this was a political document. There are some aspects that will need to be further developed or transformed in a technical means to enable farmers. Now, we have seen that after the code of conduct at the European level, there were several initiatives in the different member states, some of them using some of the input, of course, some of them going a little bit further, taking different approaches, but there was like this developed also by the farmers organization in France, where they created a wide list for those operators that were following the code of conduct. But we also see, for example, in Spain and Wallonia, where they are working now on a new code that could set the principles. We have seen also, for example, in Germany, a more pragmatic approach, where they just agree on the main principles. And we know also that the government has made a report on the code of conduct and what is missing, what could go forward. And that's why this is very, very interesting for us now to see that our other initiatives that are being built. We have heard today on the different initiatives. We have seen about the Smart Agri-Hubs, the IOF also as well. I think it will be important to follow the work of GaiaX. It's something that we are also very interested. We have seen Just Connect, for example. And we also participate in a different EU projects. We're working mainly on supporting our members. Sometimes we are in the advisory board, and we help a lot on the dissemination among the farmer community. And also we are working, following very closely on the data governance that is now being finalized, which will support the work. And we'll be following the Data Act, which is very important. Will have, as explained by Doris, will have important consequences for this discussion. But for us, what is very important is first the consent of the farmer, to make sure that the farmer has an informed consent, that he can control the access and the collection of data. It is important to have a proper digital identification, and also that the rules that will be applied to the European data for farmers, they are applied by EU rules, and that we need to ensure that there is a level playing field for the operators that are on the data. Now, there is a mistake there, but of course, for us also, because there are so many initiatives already, the most important is to make sure that the data space will connect these different initiatives, to make sure that there is kind of a data highway where the data can easily move from one to another. And if the farmer is no longer happy with the service provider, he can retrieve his data and can bring it to another where he will find additional value. So the most important is really that to give the means to the farmers to manage and better valorize his data. Before concluding, I think it would be important also to underline the role of the agri-cooperatives in Europe to support this work. We have seen a lot of agri-cooperatives in Europe are working in here, are investing and making this possible. and they are supporting their farmers on the collection of data, building the infrastructure, providing the know-how, providing some of the skills, helping them with investment, knowing what to do with it, but also very important to manage different systems that will enable, for example, to better work with for example, inputs. So to understand which farmer needs what, when, how, and how much, and then working with them, building on the storage and delivering the service to the farmer. So I would like to underline the role of the agri-cooperatives. And again, like this, we would like to conclude. There is a lot to say, but most of it has been said. So I will leave some time for questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Daniel. This was the last great and really relevant presentation in this session. We have no time left, unfortunately. I hope to follow up with all of you. The focus of session was to really stay in the early stages of the agri-food value chain. The next time we might consider to involve the consumer side and see how sustainable value can be produced and distributed across the chain. So many thanks again to the speakers, to the audience. We will try to follow up with the questions afterwards, thanks to the ABDF team, but we do not have time for the moment. Special thanks to Angelo Marguglio, Davide Dalle Carbonara, Nuria De Lama, the whole ABDF team for the support. I will see you the next time. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.